I'm happy to be here. I see many familiar faces, and it's good to see you all. I was told I have to stand basically here because it's being videotaped. It reminded me of a particular federal judge in Seattle, Washington, who in his courtroom had two white painted feet behind a podium, and the lawyers were not allowed to move their feet from those imprints in the carpet. So I will try and remember that, and think about the fact that I'm there and transport myself here, because I do tend to have a habit of moving around, which today I will try not to do. Well, this is a topic that I have no particular academic credentials at all to talk about. It's mostly based on life experience, and in fact it's entirely based on life experience and some small amount of research that I've done. But when you live in Mexico, as about 1 million of us Americans do, either half the year or more, or full time, you kind of take affront to the media treatment of Mexico, which down there we consider media bashing. And it's not necessarily intentional, but the reality is Mexico is a very interesting country, but they have lots of names that these people on TV can't pronounce. So what happens is they'll say this or that happened in Mexico. So it's like saying, and it's all bad, it would be like, I tell people that we're on a Canadian satellite system down there, so we get television from Seattle, Detroit, and Rochester, New York. We get all the main stations. But if the Mexicans were the recipient of the Detroit news every night into Mexico, and that's all they saw, that would end immigration to the north. Seriously. Every night, if you watch the Detroit news, multiple murders, different situations. Same in Oakland. That's the reality. Now, there's no question there's problems in Mexico. I'm not bashing America for talking poorly about Mexico. But the news does not really tell us the story, the correct story. There are many places in Mexico that are very safe to travel in, that millions of Americans come and go each year. Actually, tourism from the United States is not down. It probably would be better if the American media would stop its campaign of ignorance on locations and stop saying just Mexico. But the fact is there'd be more tourism, which would be better for their economy and help offset the problem of migration to the north. Now, I'm going to do something I normally don't do, just for a short time. I'm not going to read to you during this whole presentation, but I'm going to read something that was said and written by the President and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. His name is Richard Fisher. And I'm going to quote, "For many Americans, Mexico is seen through the lens of immigration or drug trafficking. This is a mistake. It is outperforming the United States in many economic areas and provides several important lessons for Washington policymakers that seem unable to make a start on even more urgent reforms. Mexico has a sound macroeconomic footing and is addressing microeconomic problems, still holding it back. The same cannot be said for the United States. Mexico recovered rapidly from the global financial crisis. Real gross domestic product grew 5.5% in 2010 and nearly 4% in 2011, after plummeting 6.2% in 2009. On the fiscal front, Mexico ran a budget deficit of 2.5% of gross domestic product in 2011, compared with an 8.6% of the U.S. national debt in Mexico, the debt is stable at 27% of gross national product, while in the U.S. it's 98%. I stumbled over that. What I'm saying is that in the United States, our entire gross national product equals our debt. In Mexico, only 27% of their gross national product equals their entire debt. And that's because they have done a lot fiscally to get things under control, mostly through the passing, now I'm not reading anymore, mostly through the passing of a balanced budget requirement in 2006. They have to balance their budget. We do not. And by balancing their budget and stop deficit spending, they have improved in all areas of their economy in the last couple of years, and it's getting better. Certainly, Mexico, I'm back reading again, has many problems. Deregulation has met with mixed results. Declining crude oil production threatens the government's ability to fund itself. Low high school graduation rates contribute to low labor productivity and potentially greater social instability. Continuing violence directly harms businesses and tests investor resolve, resulting in a capital and brain drain. Still, we should discard old stereotypes of Mexico and give credit to the country's fiscal and monetary authorities. The economic performance during and after the global financial crisis should allay the fears of those who doubted Mexico's capability to reform. The government has implemented greater fiscal discipline than the United States without hindering economic recovery. And most of you know the Federal Reserve is really what regulates our monetary system, and the Federal Reserve Board is made up of the presidents of about 10 Federal Reserve banks. So this is a man that should know what he's talking about. And that's about as far as I'm going to go into the economy of Mexico. There is a middle class now. There was in the early 80s developing a middle class, and they had a peso devaluation, which kind of knocked the heck out of the middle class, and it went back to the very rich and the very poor. But since that time, it's been rebuilt, and there is a fair-sized middle class now, at least in the cities and urban areas. It is still hard in the rural areas because it's basically an agricultural society, and many people did what our forefathers did in the West. They lived off their own land. They grew their own vegetables. They had their own cow, but they were basically poor, and still are. Now, education is not free. Grammar school, first 8 grades is, and all the children go through grammar school, but you have to pay for high school. And that makes it very difficult for all Mexican children to go through high school. A lot do, many do, but they have to have a source of income. And there are many nonprofits in Mexico trying to at least push those along that show academic promise. And especially in areas where there are Americans and Canadians and Europeans who believe in high school education. Certainly, many of those students have the benefit of going on through high school and finishing up. Now, their second language in school is English. So most young Mexicans of any education at all, meaning high school and above, speak English. Those that just went through grammar school, odds are they don't speak much English. They have to learn it as they go, kind of like we do when we get out there. Those of us that are not Spanish speakers, we have to learn it as we go. And that's what we do. We're not generally fluent in Spanish, meaning you can't carry on an intricate conversation, but we learn phrases and words enough to get along in our daily life. And meanwhile, the areas where we are, the Mexicans themselves are learning enough English, so communication is not an issue. And I only bring that up in case anyone wants to travel down there. Now, geopolitics. Why we have more focus from the eastern establishment, Washington, the Northeast elite, on Mexico. It's right next door. We send money and treasure and young men to die in foreign countries across multiple oceans, where we would have little interest, really, but do very little and nothing in Mexico, which we share a 2,000-mile border with. Now that just intuitively doesn't make sense to me. And it doesn't make sense to a lot of people who understand that the focus should not be so much on Syria right now, for instance. Well, my best friend growing up was a Syrian. I have nothing against Syria. 8,000 people have died in Syria. 45,000 have died in the last few years in Mexico in the drug wars. Yet we pay very little attention to that. Really, it's just mouth service rather than real treasure and real action. Yet we're thinking of intervening in a country such as Syria, where we have little or no interest. So and that's one of the reasons I agreed to speak on this subject. Our future is not going to be based on Syria. But 12 million Hispanics are in our country now, illegally, we're told, and millions or more are here legally. It's a country of 110 million, which will be at 150 million by 2050, with a virtual 2,000-mile border, and we're paying virtually no attention to what goes on down there, except for drug wars. So, I think there's a lack of leadership in Washington, and it would not be unusual because Mexico has always historically been treated as basically a second-class place to be. President Polk decided they were annoying, so in 1845, 46, he invaded Mexico and cut it in half. The end result was, whoops, I didn't want to use that one. Sorry. Too many little gadgets around. Where's my pointer? Did I cover it up somewhere? No? Whoops, that's stuck in the notebook. All right. This is, and we're not going to have many slides, this is the country of Mexico. I've just visualized the size in proportion to something else I'm going to show you. It used to be twice this size. If we had a whole picture, it would be up here. 10 of our states were Mexico. Right up to a little north of where we live in California was Mexico. Texas was Mexico. Nevada, Utah, Colorado, part of Kansas. That was all Mexico. And we took it from them. In a short war, a couple of years later, we did what we call the Gadsden Purchase, and we paid them $5 million for this hunk of land right here in New Mexico and Arizona, just to straighten out the lines. So we had a war. We went down. We took the country, just like France did before that, and Spain before that, and ended up cutting it in half. Now, my point is that at least those of us in the West should recognize that we should have some kind of special relationship with this country. I mean, we have a special relationship with England, and in the eastern United States, where I grew up, the special relationships exist generally with Europe because of immigration from Germany and France and Holland and whatever. But we in the West at least should have some cognizance of the country that used to own us and that we just took for nothing, for no real reason. So my point is we should open our mind to the problems of Mexico and be aware of them. And geopolitically, we should be spending much more time and attention there. But you know, what we think in the West doesn't count a lot in Washington anymore. Is that right? It doesn't really matter. They do what they want in the Northeast. All right. So that's why we get lip service for the drug problem, the border. We have states like Arizona fighting the federal government because they're not doing anything. Now, one might wonder why the federal government really isn't doing all that much. Can anybody think of a reason? What's the reason for most things? Money. 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 We're complaining about all these immigrants illegally here, but when they're paid, most of them pay federal taxes. It's taken out of their wages. Social Security is taken out. State disability is taken out. And guess what? They never get to use any of it. So where's the money going? It's going to support us. It's keeping Medicare and Social Security fucked up to the tune of probably $500 billion a year. So, do we want to kick all these people out? One, doing it would be impossible. That's the reality. But it's money. Why does the federal government still allow smoking, for instance? It's money. The governments cannot afford to ban people or things that produce money, especially nowadays. So, my point is, I don't have an immigration solution, and I'm not here to talk about that. And it's true, they use a lot of services, and economics argue on both sides. If you go into Google all these things, you go into the internet, they'll argue on one side, well, it's $500 billion, it's $500 billion that they produce, and they use 328 million, and some, you know, they're arguing back and forth. But there's no question they're probably paying for themselves, or even a lot more paying for us in the end, in the bottom line. So, and how practically are we going to lift 12 million people whose children, many of whom are citizens? So the answer is get rid of the criminals. And that's fair. If we were criminal in Mexico, they'd get rid of us. But we can go into Mexico a lot easier than Mexicans come to the United States. You know, we get to get down there. We can live there. We can bring furniture, bring a car. All we got to do is spend a little money for a permit. They open their country to us, but we have not done the same to them, supposedly because of jobs. However, we haven't seen that many people rushing to get the jobs that they have. So it's pretty hard to be an illegal immigrant and work nowadays, unless it's really a low-level job hidden away where you're paid cash. And there are certainly some of those. But the pressure is on those employers now. I guess the best statistic is go to the IRS. The IRS will tell you they receive about 5 million returns with wrong Social Security numbers, and most of those are illegals. Most of them pay their taxes under false Social Security numbers or non-existent Social Security numbers. They're afraid not to pay taxes because that's the first thing in Mexico. If you don't pay the taxes, they grab you. Even though their system of taxation is weird and the rich don't get grabbed before due. The fact is, most of these 5 million tax returns that are received by the IRS with wrong numbers are illegals. The IRS keeps the money. They don't send it back because it's the wrong Social Security number. So that's some more money that they get for the general pot. All right, going off geopolitics. what Mexico is facing now is a July election for president. Now, it's hard to remember because the names are different and the political parties are different, and you have to almost reverse everything in Mexico. The PRI is a major party, and PRI, you're not going to remember this, but I'll say it backwards, is the Institutional Revolutionary Party. PRI backwards. The Institutional Revolutionary Party. That's a party that's been in power for about 80 years, except for the last 12. 12 years ago, Vicente Fox of the PAN, P-A-N party, National Action Party, again backwards, was elected president for 6 years. He was followed in a very close election by 0.5%. He won. Felipe Calderon of PAN won. He will be going out of office in July. And there are 3 people running president. PRI is by far thought to be going to be the winner, because mostly people in Mexico are tired of the drug wars. Felipe Calderon fought the drug wars. He fought the cartels. Caused a lot of deaths. Very few innocents. Very few innocents. Innocents in the sense that they were not involved in the drug war or living off of it. However, there were women and children who were part of families of men in the drug trade who, in my opinion, are innocents that have been killed. But we're not going to get killed in the drug war. If we are, it's an entirely accidental thing that, and it would be worldwide publicity. If one American is killed down there, it's like the end of the world. It happened in Canada. Last 5 years, 2 Canadians have been killed in the western part of Mexico. Both of them were involved in the drug trade. But in Mexico, I mean, in Canada, the news was, oh, they killed this older man and a younger man. But they just don't go around killing tourists, and they don't go around killing people that live there and mind their own business, and it's not good for their business. So I grew up in Brooklyn, where there were gangs, and you knew the safest place to live was in the neighborhood of the gang leader, because nothing bad ever happened there, and nothing happens where I live in Puerto Vallarta, because probably, and I don't know this for a fact, many of the cartel leaders probably have homes there. Felipe Calderon, the president, certainly does, and spends a lot of time there. So, you know, it's a well protected community or city area, and however, going on with so these 3, the third party is the leftist party. A man named Obrador is running, and he's the one that nearly beat Calderon 6 years ago, lost by 0.5%. He's not considered to be. He's considered the old has-been at this point. The PRI candidate is Enrico Peña Nieto. He's 45 years old. He's called Pretty Boy. And there's a woman who's 51 named Josefina Vázquez Mota, who's called the Doll. So you got Pretty Boy running against the Doll, and the has-been is in the back. And it's the inspectors as well. You can remember people this way. You can't remember the names, but Pretty Boy, that's easy. The Doll, that's easy. And the has-been, that's even easier. So the press refer to him that way. The election's in July. It's pretty much assured that PRI will come back into power. Now, what will they do? Their candidate, Nieto, has publicly described what he envisions as to be a new gendarmerie, more like Italy and Spain have had, a mixture of police and military forces. Right now they have local police, federal police, the old federales, but they're really policemen. They're not soldiers, and they have the Army and the Marines. And the Navy. None of them are really truly trained for what this fight is all about. You're using police officers who are not equipped with heavy arms to take on cartels who fight more like soldiers with heavy arms. And then you're using the military who are not used to fighting in urban areas and in small places with small numbers. So neither of these agencies are really equipped to fight the cartels, who have become very military. Now, it used to be there were multiple cartels in Mexico, but they've, like everything in the U.S., where you roll up in an industry, they've rolled it up. You've got basically the West here, controlled by the Sinaloa cartel, which is based right in here. And you've got, over the other side of the mountains, the Gulf cartel, which is now the Zetas. So on this side of the country, basically, the Caribbean side, the eastern side, is the Zetas. Now, the Zetas started out being a couple of thousand military commando types who were in the army, who were supposed to fight the cartels, but saw there was so much money into it, they took over the cartels and are now running. And they're very militant, and they fight like an army. The Sinaloa cartel is which has the western part of the country, is more like a typical drug cartel, and probably in a battle would lose out to the Zetas. Now, some thought is let the government cooperate with one to wipe out the other, and divide and conquer. And there may be a little of that going on with the U.S. approving. But the reality is, the country is separated by, this is the Rocky Mountains. We all know where they are in the United States, right? Well, they keep going. Right there. That's what separates Mexico. The Rocky Mountains keep going through Mexico. Now you can see they have an east and they have a west, and a geography that means everything runs north or south. You either run north or south on the Pacific side or north and south on the Caribbean side. And that's basically how the drugs run. Now, why are they running up from down here, down in Colombia? They're running because we're buying. Americans are buying. That's why they're coming here. It's really, we are the market. All right? There's a very small market for drugs, especially cocaine, heroin, in Mexico. However, the cartels now, instead of just transporting, not just transporting the drugs, they've decided they can make more money by making methamphetamine. See, methamphetamine, they can't make coke. You need cocoa leaves for that. They can't grow it. But they can make meth. And they're making it up in here and shipping it into the United States. Now, if we seriously wanted to stop it, don't you think we could? I mean, it may have been tough with most of our troops tied up in Iraq and then Afghanistan. But if we, in the old days, we used to have border forts along here. The only one still in operation is Fort Bliss here in El Paso. All the rest have been closed. Our troops are up near Canada, in Fort Lewis, Washington, and Fort Riley, Kansas, in the middle of the country. I mean, would it make a lot of sense to put them down here on our border and do something about this drug problem? Things could be done if they wanted to, and maybe they will. Maybe they will, but they're not going to do it unless there's a lot of pressure. Because in Washington, the drug war that started in the 70s has been a total loser. And nobody wants any connection to it politically, because it was another war that we lost. All right? The drug war, as declared in the 70s, we have totally lost it. At best, we intercept 5% of what's shipped into the United States. And think about our drug policy. What are we doing in Afghanistan? We're protecting the poppy growers that produce the product that makes heroin. We're protecting them. We're making sure they can stay in business so they have a livelihood. Does that make sense for a cohesive drug policy? Not a lot. Not a lot. So on one hand, we're spending our treasure and our young people's lives on protecting poppy growers who produce heroin and is the world's main source of heroin, and yet over here we're fighting a drug war. Something's wrong. Now, cooperating with Mexican government, at least in the last 12 years, really should have been pretty easy, because you had Fox and Calderon dedicated to fighting a drug war. That may not be the case when the new guy comes in, because I think he's, if I were in Mexico City, I might say, hey, let's just tax it and let it go through. We're not using it. Tax it and let it keep going. It's the U.S. problem. Why are we fighting and having our people killed over something that we really don't use that much? Boy, if they did that, that would be interesting. That might force the United States into thinking about legalizing it and treating it as a health issue. Because we haven't done anything about stopping the supply through this drug war for 40 years. Maybe the time is to follow what people were saying 30 years ago when Joe McNamara, who was police commissioner in New York, and then Kansas City and San Jose, and there's a fellow at the Hoover, said, why don't we look at least making it a health issue? If half the people in our prisons are in there for drugs. We're paying through the nose for that. So, but nothing changes. Nothing changes. We keep going down the same old paths that have not led to any kind of solutions, because politically, no politician can come out and say, I'm for legalizing drugs. You talk to them privately, at least when I used to, I stopped because it was a waste of time. 8 out of 10 of them privately would say, well, you're absolutely right. But politically, we can't say that. So, it's going to keep going on and on and on. We just don't learn from our mistakes. But be that as it may, 90% of the drug issues are in the cities of Tijuana, Nogales, or right across the border here, along here. Okay. There is small problems, relatively small, in Acapulco. And in this, there's 2 states here. There's 32 states in Mexico, and it's a federation. And down in the south, the states tend to be geographically much smaller than they are in the north. So down here, in a couple of states, Michoacan and Guerrero, there are some local drug issues and fighting going on between cartels. But pretty much it's settled. This is Zetas, this is Sinaloa, and they're not fighting each other all that much. And the amount of money and payoffs and corruption, unbelievable. Unbelievable. But corruption is not just in Mexico. If you travel the world, and many of you have, you'll find doing business in many other countries requires bribery, requires all kinds of things. European countries are willing to do that. It's just in their budget. France, Germany, you go to Asia, they pay off the officials to get the contracts. U.S., we can't do it. It violates our law. So corruption is not new to Mexico. I mean, it's all over. But it is particularly bad in Mexico. It is thought to affect 10% of their gross national product. In other words, 10% of the GNP is paying people off to get something done. And that's a lot. Some would say back in the 20s and 30s, that was about the amount it would take in Chicago, New York, and New Jersey. But I don't know that, and that's kind of argumentative and not part of my statement. So, inflation has really slowed down in Mexico. You can live there for about a third less than living here, and that's if you live well. Food is about 2/3, and you can, in Puerto Vallarta, they got a Costco with the best meat. They have Walmart. It's no different living there than living here. as far as food goes. Water, which used to be a problem, at least in Puerto Vallarta, is no longer a problem. They have a water treatment plant. And any place you live has its own water purification system. It's been years since we ran into anybody that truly had turista. Some people come down for a week, they drink a lot, they eat all the different foods, and by the third day they say, gee, I got turista. Well, they really don't. We call it climate sickness. For a day, you know, their body is reacting to the over-drinking and eating different foods and lots of sun, and so they don't feel well for a day. But turista has been pretty much banished. Not everywhere, just Puerto Vallarta. Water is still a problem in most of Mexico, so you drink bottled water. If anybody has driven, anybody driven down there? And did you 3, 4, 5? Did you drive down to Baja, or did you come down the West Coast? West Coast. So you took Highway 15 from the galleys down? Okay, well, you'd be surprised. I've been doing this. I've drove that 10 times since 2005. And in the beginning, the roads were 1 lane each way, 2 lanes, potholes. But now, you can drive from the border to Nogales, across the border about 8 in the morning. You can get to Puerto Vallarta the following day. And except for the last 90 miles through the mountains here, it's pretty much all major highways. It's not freeways, they're tollways. You have to pay. There's toll booths every 15, 20 miles. You pay. But they're fenced. You can go 80 miles an hour. There's no potholes. It's really easy to drive in Mexico. Now, when you cross from one state to another, for instance, going Nogales route, you're in the state of Sonora, and you also have the Sonoran Desert here. The Sonoran Desert actually went all the way up to Phoenix, and it includes Tucson, etc. But you'll come through the Sonoran Desert, through Hermosillo, and many people then just go to Guaymas and San Carlos, which is a resort area here. And for that, you just pay a small amount for what's called a Sonora Pass. You don't need anything special on your car. So you can just drive down there and stay however long you want without any other special permit. You need a tourist permit, which really doesn't cost anything, and a small amount for the car permit. But when you get down, when you get about a 10-hour drive, you finally get to the end of the state of Sonora, which is very big. You'll find a checkpoint. There'll be agricultural station like they have when you come into California. There'll be an army station where they check trucks and whatever. When they see us, they just wave us through. I've made 10 trips all the way down to Puerto Vallarta, been followed by the federalities, the local police, never got stopped, never had a problem. We did get stopped in the mountains just before Puerto Vallarta, about 2 years ago, by an army detachment. And these were kids with their face masks on, and they tried to look ferocious, but they were just Mexican kids, so we started kidding around with them, and the things fell off. And after a while, it was a big joke, and we were on our way. It was a little scary when you came right on them, because they're all in masks, and you wondered whether they're real army or not, but it turned out to be a big nothing. And that's been the experience of most people. My friends who come from the east come down this way. They come through Nuevo Laredo and come across the mountains to here, down to Puerto Vallarta. I haven't heard any of them with any major problems, and I'm talking about hundreds and hundreds of trips. Now, the only big city from Puerto Vallarta is Guadalajara, which is about a 4.5-hour drive, only because of the mountains. If you didn't have the mountains, you could probably do it in 2.5 hours. But this is the West. Lots of people go to Cabo San Lucas. I'm not as familiar with the East at all. I spent some time in the Yucatan Peninsula, and that, in my mind, is perfectly safe. So the bottom line is you have to know where you're going before you go. You have to have an idea of your route, and weekend cavalcade, you know, with multiple, that's what people with trailers do. They pull trailers down there by the thousands, and you'll find 8 or 10 of them along the road. We just love it because it kind of blocks it for a while. They pull over and we can pass them. But now with the freeways, you can pass them anyway. Tollways, not freeways. So the fact is that Mexico is a real bargain for Americans. It's living there. It's kind of like they had the International House Hunters show yesterday that my wife videotaped. They would import my house. A couple of people looking for houses, and I saw that basically their budget was $350,000, and they had choices of 4 beautiful places. It is just a nice place to be. It's peaceful. There's no harassment. They have actually, you know, the worldwide thing for numbers for police officers is 1 per 1,000 population. Puerto Vallarta has 2 per 1,000. They also have a Marine battalion there and an Army battalion. It's surrounded by mountains, so there's only really 3 roads in, airplane or boat. So it's pretty safe. They can close that place off very quickly. And that's why so many, the president and others spend a lot of time there. You fly in, you fly out. Shouldn't be any problems whatsoever. I'm not in the tourism business. I'm just saying that this is what, if our media in the United States were being accurate, they wouldn't say 10 people were killed in Mexico last night. They'd say in Tijuana, or they'd say in Nogales, or some specific place that you could identify. But they don't do that. They don't do that. And it is detrimental. Now, I think it's obvious why Mexico should be important to us. I mean, we don't have a neighbor with it except Canada. Canada we have no problems with. But we arguably have a failed state, or one failing, because of the drug war, right next to our 2,000-mile border and are doing virtually nothing. It makes no sense to me. And I'm just asking, and the purpose of my talk is to have people start thinking a little bit about it. They're wonderful people. They're family-oriented. They're happy. We Americans get there and we're put off, many people, by poverty. But it's to us it's poverty. To them it's not. You go to any place in Puerto Vallarta, there's no roofs. Well, there's no roofs because they don't need one until the rains come, and then they'll put up a roof. And it's usually a temporary one for June, July, August, September, and then they take it down. They don't need it. Temperature doesn't vary hardly at all, and so not that there's not a lot of poor people there. There are. And there's a lot we could be doing down there that would make some sense to affect our economy in the United States. Trade, the United States is their biggest trading partner. They manufacture more cars in Mexico than we do in the United States. They have become a large manufacturing country. So it is not as backward as one might think. But there are a lot of rural areas that are poor, more like the rural South, I would say, in the United States. But nobody's starving to death. And they have national health care. Anybody that needs health care will get it. I'm going to end with this. This is just a personal story. I have not that you really care. On my left foot, I have 2 toes. One kind of crooked and it ran into this one, and it's been aching me for about 2 years now, rubbing together, and no matter what I did, it would get inflamed. So I went into a foot doctor in Puerto Vallarta a few months ago, and I showed her the problem. She said, all right, well, I'll break the toe, we'll straighten it, you'll be fine in a month, I'll just have it in a splint. And I said, how much? She said, $350. And that includes a weekly visit to be sure no infection, and in 30 days it'll be over. That was it, $350. I paid her $25 for the visit. Well, my son was coming the following week, and I needed 30 days, and I didn't have it because we were coming home 2 weeks after that. So I get here. So I go in and see the doctor. I'm making up the numbers, because I haven't seen the numbers yet. But this is, I have some experience in this field. I have about 8 visits to the doctor. I got to go to a surgery center, and then I have an anesthesiologist. I don't think they'll try and pull having an assistant to fix my toe, but they might. And then there's a surgeon. The bill will probably be about $25,000. See, that's our system in the United States. And there won't be any better job, or any worse job, than this female doctor who would do it in her office under a local, bandaging it up the same way they'll do it here. Went to the University of Madrid, perfectly qualified, and she's pretty. For $350. So, you think we have problems up here? Now, there is a little point to this, and that is medical tourism is becoming very big down there. Puerto Vallarta is loaded with hospitals and well-trained physicians from the United States that speak English, and the costs are so much lower that people that get sick down there, that think they want to come home, the insurance here, and in Canada, I had 3 instances this last winter, they say, no, stay there. Go to this hospital, they'll take care of you. When you get home, we'll send a nurse to rebandage what needs to be done every day to your home. And they get away for about 10% of what it would cost to bring them home and treat them in Canada. Probably a lot, the cost in the U.S. would be astronomical. So, a lot of people are going down there getting medical treatment. And it's reasonably good treatment. I'm not guaranteeing it. But the people that live there, especially dental, are very happy with it and are very comfortable. All right. Questions? Yes.
Okay, Dr. Jerry. Well done, Dan. Very well done.
Thank you, sir.
I wonder, well, when I first started my medical practice in Monterey County, I had an office in Salinas. And there, they had the Bracero program. And we didn't have any problem with illegal immigrants or anything. I never understood why they get away with it. Against the law now. And it seems to me if we could reinstitute it, it would solve a big problem with illegals.
Yeah. Thank you for pointing that out. I was going to make mention of this. During World War II, when our young men were off fighting a war, the federal government said, okay, let the Mexicans come up and do the work in the fields. That was the Bracero program. Because right after the war, the government said, well, we don't need you anymore. Some of them had kids when they were up here doing the war, so they said, you got to go back. Well, the kids had to go because they had no mother or father here, so they went back. Many of them were American citizens and later came to the United States. But yeah, there is many things that could, that's just an example. When we need it, we solved it. We had a program. Now we could have these programs nowadays, but it's become so political that I know there's no chance in the East of convincing the people I grew up with, Italian, Irish, Pole, Germans, or whatever, of any special relationship with Mexico. There's no chance, because their only experience was when the Puerto Ricans arrived in New York in the early 50s, and it wasn't a good one. But in the West, we should look at it a little more open-mindedly. There ought to be programs, and there are things that could be done to solve a lot of the problems and keep the cost of our pay them fair wages, give them fair housing. Many of them, they work in the vineyards out here, all the time, and nobody's talking much about it. Most of them have papers of some kind or another. I wouldn't guess to say how many are really legal. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry.
In many instances, when we get involved with other countries, it's because we see a strategic advantage, either real or purported. What are the strategic advantages with Mexico?
Well, President Monroe said it many years ago. We know we have two oceans between us, protecting us on each side. And our interest should be the Western Hemisphere. Now, I know there's intercontinental ballistic missiles and all of that. But that doesn't mean every decision we make should be based on intercontinental ballistic missiles. We make huge decisions on China. China is basically no threat to the United States. Yet we make they have a huge army, and if they can walk on water, we'd be worried. But they can't. They can't. They don't have a navy that can bring them over here, so why worry about it? The only thing they can do is send a missile, and we got plenty of those ourselves. So our interest historically has been looking to Europe and then more recently Asia, and we're not looking in our own backyard. Where our border, people who live on our border are not feeling safe at all. There's invasions every night, thousands of people crawling across the desert, sneaking in, and we catch 10% of them. That's a real problem in my mind. Strategically, I think they are our friends, but I think we could do a lot more to buttress the friendship, improve their economy, help improve our economy. They do have oil. There's some argument that they don't have as much as they thought, and then there's a big argument they just found a huge new oil field down there. So we're not so sure about that. But strategically, I would think one example is just showing up in the TV shows. And for those of us who have been following, this kind of thing for many years, I've been very worried the cartels will just get into bed with the terrorists. I mean, the cartels already have their way into the United States. Why not just let the terrorists join in and cross the border? And so what did we see? We saw Iran hiring cartel members in Mexico to go to Washington and kill the Saudi Arabian ambassador to Washington. This was just last year. Luckily they were captured because the guy, the terrorist they hired was an informant. So yeah, we have this is the soft point in our war on terrorism, right there. It's so easy for them. Interestingly enough, with the dark complexion or whatever, you can't tell a lot of people from the Middle East if they didn't open their mouths. What's different from being Hispanic? I mean, and that border is porous, absolutely porous. And we haven't done anything about it. So I predict if Al-Qaeda ever really manages to attack us or any other terrorist organization, it'll come from Mexico. Because we've been kind of blowing it off and ignoring it. Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
I was very happy to hear the figures on the gross national profit now. But one thing I'm curious about, I know you mentioned they have a large automotive factories, and I know their pharmaceutical business is quite large. And I'm wondering, is that all or any of it directed by Mexico and their businesses, or are they all controlled by United States interests?
That's a good question. And I'm going to have to give a general answer. And my understanding is that if Ford Motor Company has a subsidiary in Mexico, or General Motors or any other company, they will have ownership of approximately 50%. They can own 51%, but they will have Mexican ownership right along with them, and not be a standalone U.S. company. For many reasons, political, labor, it's a different culture down there, and you really do. I didn't emphasize this a lot, but if you buy property or do anything down there, you really are dealing with Napoleonic law, a law we're not used to, a culture we're not used to. You really need good advice. But people that are down there know it. The corporations do the same thing. They partner up, and that's why the wealthiest man in the world is a Mexican, Carlos Slim. I mean, he's partnered up with everybody. You know, the telephone company, you know, this, you know, that. I mean, so.
I think that my question is, are they beginning to learn the business culture more and more?
Who? The Mexicans? Well, yeah. They run some pretty big businesses down there. Yeah, they do themselves. And I think you'll find that, and I'm guessing here, so I shouldn't. It's speculation. That if you have a manager of any big plant, automotive plant in Mexico, he's going to be a Mexican. He'll probably have somebody that reports to corporate headquarters on his staff. But it'll be a Mexican. All because of the reasons I said, cultural, legal, the labor laws are much different than ours. You really need someone that knows Mexico. Yes, sir.
Dan, I was watching the Charter Oaks a week or two ago, and they had a man from Mexico, and I never remember names and things like that, but he put forth a thesis about that these cartels are very much, of course, involved in drugs, but in fact their real goal is to take over a region of the country and just dominate it. And if they can do that and get protection money and things like that, that they'll end up having a lot more wealth under their control than just doing the drugs. I wondered if you comment on that.
Well, not having given a hell of a lot of thought, I would say that the most likely area for them to take over is basically right up here, and it's mostly desert, except for the border cities of Juarez, Nuevo Laredo, Matamoros. And that is where the heavy concentration is of cartels being in urban areas and they're really trying to control the border because that's where they get the drugs into the United States. Political control, military control. They don't care about controlling politically and military down here. That doesn't do them any good. This is where the drugs come across. And of course, then I'll skip over to here. The same is true in these areas. So again, it's the border. That's what they're trying to control.
So you would disagree? You would say that they are focused primarily and almost exclusively on the drug and the money and that?
Oh, no, I will clarify. I believe they are taking a lot of their drug profits and putting them into legitimate business. For instance, I can't prove it, but a lot of these hospitals popping up in Puerto Vallarta, I know it's not the doctor's building. A lot of the nightclubs that start up, it seems you wonder how they do any business because there's never anybody there. And a lot of money goes in, millions of dollars goes into their decor and everything. I think it's drug money. I think any place that uses a lot of cash, and Mexico is a cash society, by the way. So they are putting their money they're laundering their money into legitimate businesses. And in that sense, they are going into business and expanding their empire, yes. But that could be all over Mexico, in whatever area they think they want to invest in, the business side. They don't need political control to do that. You know, and military control. They're just putting their billions in cash into legitimate businesses, which is what our criminals did in this country, Casa Nostra, etc. Yes.
I haven't heard any mention about marijuana growers invading our national forests here in California, particularly down the Sequoia National Forest. And some of these now appear to be Mexican people.
Oh, no question.
There's been some talk just lately about the cartels, Mexican cartels moving into that area.
Yeah, well, I have particular knowledge of that because my nephew was the head of the DEA in charge of marijuana eradication on the whole North Coast.
Yeah,
Many
I
years.
know they're up here, but they're moving into
Yeah,
the
yeah.
national forest.
Yeah, well, that's because California has shown sort of a schizophrenic position on marijuana. The majority of the people don't seem to want to treat it as being illegal, and because of our climate, and we do have lots of national park lands, and the national government is responsible for patrolling them, and they're not. Yeah, they're going to go where they can grow the pot, and it's a war that's being lost. You don't hear about trials in federal court of too many marijuana growers. It's going to be hard to get a jury of 12 people where at least a couple of them on here are pro-marijuana.
Well, they've been growing marijuana for a long time, but I mean, except for Mexicans, cartels moving into it is more recent.
Well, I think they've been in it for years, but I think they maybe just identified the fact that there's some connections. And it's not just them growing it. To me, it's just another part of the drug war that we've lost. I don't think that is a major. I don't think that's a major problem between us and Mexico. I mean, we just got to do a better job policing our lands.
No, but part of the issue is that they're taking over our federal lands.
Well, let the feds do something about it. We've got armies in Iraq and Afghanistan. Let them do something on our federal land. They're not doing it because it's a losing proposition. And it's annoying. I agree it's annoying, but I don't think it's the hard drugs that I'm more concerned about coming across the border than marijuana. Yes, sir.
One of the things I'm concerned about is the us and them attitude we have. In this country, in the Middle West as an example, many of the elementary schools now have 40 to 60% of the students are Spanish-speaking origin. The birth rate in this country for the Spanish-speaking people is rapidly approaching the non-Spanish speaking. Should we not be calling us, and them, us also?
Yes, and if that is not stated, it's implied on what I'm saying is that this that the population of many millions and growing in this country of Hispanic people is really us, and I agree completely, but it's not true in many areas of our society. There's still prejudice, just like there was with blacks. The trouble is, it takes a couple of generations to assimilate. And in the Midwest, I would suspect they haven't gotten to the couple of generations yet. Whereas certainly in Texas, in Arizona, and California, there's been many generations of Hispanics. And much easier for us to deal with them, live with them, work with them, than in the Midwest, where I think it's probably just in the last 20, 25 years, like in Atlanta, for instance. I mean, 25 years ago, there wasn't many people from Mexico in Atlanta, but now they're all over. They're in North Carolina and South Carolina. Yeah, they're going places other than here. And they will assimilate, just like the Poles and the Irish and everybody else, except the blacks, which is a whole other issue.
Yes, I was in Costa Rica for a month at a language school, and I stayed with a private home for that month. All through that suburb, and these were all Costa Rican citizens, the walls had razor wire, glass on the roof, and I'm asking the question about expatriate or even other citizen communities in Mexico, because that seems to be the image of a lot of people thinking about coming down here. Oh yeah, they're expatriate communities, but they're surrounded by walls, they've got razor wire, they've got glass on them, and they're safe inside their community. Don't get out. Could you comment on that?
Yes, I can. That was my experience 30, 40 years ago. It has not been my experience in the last 20 to 25 years. I haven't seen walls built with broken bottles sticking up on the top so that they have jagged edges in many years. They're still around because they were built years and years ago. Occasionally I'll see the wire on business. I can't think of any home I've seen it on in many years. But again, as you've seen in Central America and in Mexico, there's no zoning laws, so it's spotty. In other words, you can have 3 nice homes and then 4 shacks and then a nice home and 3 shacks. And the person in a nice home may well feel a need to protect themselves. And there may be more crime there. There may be fewer police. There's all kinds of reasons for that. It's a shame that they have to live that way. I don't know whether, in fact, they do or not. You were there. You have to decide for yourself whether you perceived whether all that was necessary. I haven't seen it very much. In not nearly as much as we did many years ago. Yes.
Yes. Comment and then a question, and maybe 2 comments. The Bracero program was discontinued in 1965 because of all of the abuses. In fact, we're still litigating money that was taken from the workers here, was supposed to go in a fund and be paid. Many of those workers, of course, are deceased and never received any of the money that they earned here. And one reason that a guest worker program hasn't been instituted is because of that legacy, that history of abuse of the workers and the failure to pay them. Another comment, well, when we talk about corruption in Mexico or Latin America in general, that's kind of a stereotype, but in many ways there are people who have looked at this and said, well, it doesn't in any way equal, in fact, corporate welfare in the United States, or what we have is legalized bribery, particularly now with Citizens United decision, where just millions of dollars are going into these campaigns, which means people that pay this money have access to the leaders in Washington. Going back to the lack of interest in Mexico or concern about Mexico, I share that. I think you've given a very positive sort of view of Mexico today, and I have some reservations about that. But there is a long history of, let's say, anti-Hispanic or Spanish-speaking bias in the United States, and it still exists in Santa Rosa, in California, in Texas, and Arizona. It's not just in Kansas. It's certainly in Florida. It's in New York. It goes back to, well, what is known as the Black Legend of the Spanish Conquest, essentially. And that Spaniards or Portuguese are in some way inferior Europeans to England, the Netherlands, France, or Germany, or the other northern European countries. We treat the Latin Americans basically as inferiors, either whether diplomatically or on a person-to-person basis. And historically, we never react in terms of foreign policy. It's not until there's a crisis or maybe a natural disaster that all of a sudden we realize there are all these countries down there. And Mexico now has a major trading partner, maybe second, major trading partner in the United States. Brazil is now the 5th largest economy in the world, and yet we aren't essentially focusing on that part of the world. The question, I'm sorry about all the comments, but the question is there a contradiction in the idea that you raise the point that we have troops, maybe we're threatening Syria, but we have troops in Iraq, Afghanistan, we're involved in Libya, and that part of the world, that we're ignoring? Are you suggesting greater militarization of the border with Mexico, either because of immigration or because of the drug trade?
Okay, thank you for those informative comments. Given a long historical perspective, they're very accurate, in my opinion. And that's a little bit why I was trying to differentiate the West from the East, because the West, there is a little more historical connection with Spain than the East. And we were always on the side of the British and the French versus the Spanish in all the hundreds of wars, hundreds of years of wars they were in. As far as what I'm recommending is, no, I'm not militarizing the border, but I am recommending that we use the technology that we have in cooperation with Mexican law enforcement, whether it be military or civilian, that is not corrupt, as best as we can determine, and secure the border. It does not take, with modern technology, troops to have a soldier every 20 yards. It does not take that. We have drones. We got now 1,000 of them, mostly being used, flown out of Nevada, but used overseas, that could easily be put to use along our border, and you can have a lot more solid situation than we have now. There's also equipment that easily can show tunnels underneath our border if they would just spend the money and the time to actually cover the whole border on a regular basis looking for tunnels. They have radar. They can go down a lot deeper than they can build the tunnels. And there are hundreds of tunnels underneath the border. It's a big thing when they announce they found one or two. But there's hundreds of them now. So I do think what holds us back is an old law called the Posse Comitatus Act. This is a federal law from the late 1800s, after the Civil War, that precludes the use of federal troops to enforce civilian law. It does have a provision where you can do that when martial law is declared, as was done in the fire of San Francisco for a few days in 1906. But basically, in this country, we do not want our armed forces enforcing civilian law. That act is what the federal government uses to buttress their argument that they just can't do more. But we know they can do more. That act can be amended. They've amended just about everything else that we know in the law. But they could also do what Mexico's thinking about it, having a cross between the military and police, which the Border Patrol to some extent is. They are trained for both. But that's just to stop people crossing the border. It's not the people so much that are the problem, because they come and go. They come across and they go back. And they send money back. In Western Union, great stock though, because they charge you $10 to send $50. And there's millions of them sending $50 a week, and Western Union's getting $10 out of every one of them. Plus the float on the currency. So we're making lots of money. But we could talk the subject. I do think there's a lot more we could do. And there has been, with Arizona taking the position it has gotten a lot more focus, and the feds have been forced into doing a little more. But they're doing stupid things. That walking gun thing was just stupid, sending 700-800 guns, automatic weapons down south. That the federal agents decided to trace the guns, and maybe they'd find who the leaders were. They know who the leaders are. They know. Mexico knows who the leaders are. I mean, and they can grab them anytime they want, if they have the will. And they have places to put them. 60 miles off Puerto Vallarta, there's a prison island. Tres Maris. Nobody ever got out of there. It's surrounded by the Navy and the Marines. And they put them there, they're done. Now, what the Mexican cartels fear the worst is being exported to the U.S. and tried here and imprisoned in one of our supermax prisons. That's their real fear. They don't mind going to one of their own prisons because they can live like kings. And they can leave whenever they want. That literally. The biggest cartel leader in Mexico, Guzman, was in prison in 2001, and he ran the whole business from prison for some years, and then they started interfering in his cartel. He said, I got to leave, so he left. I mean, he's been out since. So, anyway, but a lot of what you said is true. And I'd like to see that focus change, not still be stuck back in Britain and France, fighting in Spain, Yes.
No, it's not. Just speak right.
I want to thank you. I learned a lot. I hope I'm not anti-Hispanic. I hope I'm not. My father came to this country from Italy when he was 17 and couldn't speak a word of English, and learned to speak English, became educated, had a successful life, and nobody printed everything in Italian for him. Are we going to become a Spanish-speaking nation?
Well, I have no idea. I seriously doubt it. As I said, that all the Spanish children can speak English pretty much, even in Mexico. So I think English will predominate. But let's take the worst case. Suppose we all did speak Spanish. Is that the end of the world? I mean, we won't be here. We won't be speaking. So if our great-grandchildren can speak Spanish, what's the big deal? I know many of my grandchildren in school, and I want to learn Spanish. And they are.
I just want to say, we see a difference in attitude from the government on down. Because just the other night, the presidential medal was given to Dolores Huerta, who was Cesar Chavez's biggest assistant. So I think we do see a change in attitude.
Oh, well, politics helps change that attitude, but yeah, you see, here's the stereotype. Here's the stereotype. I'll make it very simple. You go downtown Santa Rosa and you see 5 18, 19-year-olds coming down with their pants dragging below their butt. You're going to cross the street because you're scared. In Puerto Vallarta, you go right through them because they're nice kids. They're nice kids. They're polite. They work hard. They will help you if you need it. So down there, my stereotype is totally different than seeing the same people looking the same way up here, because up here they're doing it because they're forced into it by the tough guys whose uncles and fathers are all in prison. Our prisons are breeding generations of these guys with pants hanging below their butt. But in Mexico, they're doing it because they see people in the States doing it. But their parents and uncles are not in prison. And they're nice, and they work. But they're doing it because they think it looks cool. Okay? So, I met 25 years ago with William Sessions, who was head of the FBI at the time. And he convinced me that half the people in prison are there, federal and state, are there for drug-related crimes. It's a total waste. It's a total waste. We're fighting a war we can't win. It should be treated as a health issue. Put the billions of dollars into treating it as a health issue and try and save some of the people that are addicted, or wean them off, and not have our prisons filled with what becomes multiple generations of people. Because that father that's got 3 Hispanic boys walking around Santa Rosa with his pants dragging, that's creating 3 more people that are going to end up in our prison. So we got the wrong policies, and the politicians, to get elected, I haven't heard any of them, except privately, say, yeah, we ought to legalize drugs.
Thank you,
Marijuana,
Dan.
yes. But
Thanks, Dan, for a great presentation. Again, for coming back.